Welcome back to Theology in Action. I'm Levi Hytree here with Pastor Tony Caffey. How are you doing today?
Hey, Levi. We're talking about membership today.
Yeah.
This is a subject that I've been thinking and reading about a lot over the last 6 months. So you're going to ask the questions, but if I just get all kind of fired up and talk too much, don't be afraid to jump in
I'll
and
throw my pencil
interrupt
or
me.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and we did a video on this recently with two of our elders and myself. So Robin Harris and then Mike Morris, myself, talked through the benefits of church membership. You can see that link in our show notes and watch that. You might want to watch that first before you watch this video.
Yeah.
This is what is it, Levi? Deep cuts, or
Yeah.
maybe going a little bit deeper with this subject
A
with
deeper dive. Yeah.
some lingering questions that people might have.
Sure. Absolutely. I know I can lean to you. You said this Sunday that you tend to be the kind of the devil's advocate, and I can do that as well. And Kyle, who's sitting behind the camera, is kind of the same way. So we have more thoughts, and we answered a lot of questions, but what about the questions about the questions? So
Is that what we're going to call this episode?
Maybe.
The devil's advocate on
There we
membership.
go. There we go. So let's. You guys covered a lot in the first video. It was very good, very, very deep, but it did, like I said, kind of leave some extra lingering questions and raised more questions. And this is being a new thing to this church. I'm sure that will continue to be the process for a while.
Just for context sake, too, we initiated church membership in our church. Our church is about 6 years old. Hadn't had that before now, and it was something that we as elders felt like this is important for us as we grow, as we mature as a church, also to call those who are gathered to a deeper commitment to one another. It was just a burdensome thing, actually, for us as elders as we were processing that. And so that's what led to initiating the membership, which led to the video, which now leads to maybe some questions on the questions.
Yeah, for sure. So let's kind of start. We had talked about what it looks like to be a member as far as giving or volunteering, things like that. What would be some of like the theological maybe requirements? I don't know if I like that word.
No, I like that word.
Of a person trying to be a member, because I've looked at the application, I've done the application, and some of the questions are pretty clear, and they say, hey, here's our core values. You must align with our core values. Some of our core values, Kyle brought up the example of kind of state that, hey, we have a premillennialist standpoint. Is that something we've talked before that, hey, maybe that's an area that you can disagree on and it'd be okay? Yeah. Can I be a member? Can I not? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there needs to be requirements, and then what you're alluding to there is there are going to be negotiables as well as we think this through. And so I've talked before about what's called theological triage and the three levels of theological conviction. So the first, in terms of theology, is what are those things that make you a Christian? So if you deny that Jesus is God, you're not a Christian. You're a Jehovah's Witness, or you're something else. So that level one issue is the difference between a believer and a non-believer. Then there's a level two, which would determine what church you went to. So credo baptism versus paedo baptism, for instance. So we baptize confessing believers here at Verse by Verse. So if you're a Presbyterian, or if you're somebody who wants your baby baptized, like, this is not the right church for you, and so you should look for another church. And that doesn't mean you're not a believer, or that you're outside of the Orthodox confession, but it's just not a good fit for us as a church. And then on the third level are things that we can disagree with within the church. So, divorce and remarriage is a big issue that we disagree on here at Verse by Verse. Sure. Not all of us have the same view on that. And, the other aspects of eschatology could fit into that camp. So, those are the three levels. When you read our doctrinal statement, they're going to have elements of 1, 2, and 3 all in them. And what we want you to affirm, this is a requirement, is those orthodox positions that Christians have believed for 2,000 years, consistent with what you might see in the Apostles' Creed and what you would see as a basic Christian belief. So one of the reasons that we have you read that doctrinal statement and affirm it is because we want to root out anybody who would deny that.
Okay.
And then also on the second level, we're trying to discern, okay, if you believe in paedobaptism, or if you believe, let's say, that women should be pastors and elders within the church, that's probably not a good fit for verse-by-verse ministry. And so, that's good to know. There might be people who go to the application process and don't know that yet about our convictions. Then there's those, you read our doctrinal statement on premillennialism, and you might say, I think that's right, but I don't know, or I have some amillennial tendencies, or I'm kind of partial to a post-trib rapture versus a pre-trib rapture. There's all kinds of views there. What we would ask of you in that, third tier issue is, okay, we want to extend, please first be honest with us that there's a disagreement there. But then, don't be a person of contentiousness within the church body. This is what we're going to teach. We're going to teach premillennialism. We're going to teach as well a pre-trib rapture. We're going to teach, everything that's in that doctrinal statement, our convictions. I got grilled on those things before I got hired here, Levi. So, that was important for the leadership level. But, if there's maybe an uncertainty or a disagreement, okay, we can work with that as long as you're not going to be a person who's divisive within our church body.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of the qualifier there in terms of those three tiers and where there are disagreements. If you don't think that Jesus is God, going back to the first tier, we're not going to offer you membership because, quite frankly, you're not saved.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think that's good to know, because there are people that kind of read the application and see, well, wait, they say this, but I don't know where I stand on that, so maybe I just shouldn't be a member and stop. So to understand that it's not a cut and dry in every scenario in what the applications, and speaking specifically to our members here, that go ahead and continue to fill it out. It's for conversation to sort through that, and maybe it gets to finding an answer.
I'll give you another issue, too, that's kind of in that third tier space, although there's disagreement on this. The use of the gifts, sign gifts, and how they're exercised. I think most people would look at our church and say, even if you have a continuationist position, you're a cessationist church in the way that you operate. And that's probably fair. We don't have open calls for people to speak in tongues or to prophesy. And part of that is because there's so much, abuse of that turns negative. But let's say you're open to the gifts and their use, but, you want to still become a member verse by verse because you appreciate the teaching and the other doctrinal convictions. Okay, just know that this is how we operate. This is kind of our conviction in that regard. And you're going to have people in the church that maybe disagree. You're going to have here within our church hardcore cessationists that have found their home here. And there's opportunities to debate and talk through important texts in the scriptures that argue both sides of that. But let's have the unity of peace, the mindset of peace, Ephesians 4:3, within the church body. It is good when brothers gather together with unity, Psalm 133. We're not looking to create a church environment where, let's just argue through everything and every issue. That becomes quite tedious within the local church, even though we can have disagreements on some of these third tier issues. So
Yeah, great. So let's step across. I filled out the application. I'm a member now. We'll play hypothetical, and I'll use me as an example. Say, go through a rough period of life, and I do something detrimental to the church.
Yeah.
Or
you're divisive.
I'm divisive in some way. What does discipline look like in that matter?
Yeah, so, is it Titus that says, warn a divisive person once and then twice and then have nothing to do with them? There's, obviously Matthew 18 and the church discipline process that should be initiated, which, the goal in church discipline, as we talked about in the previous video, is restoration. We want to help somebody grow. So, with hypothetical Levi here, a situation like that, there's just immaturity there.
Yeah.
And you just need an older man, or in the case of a female, sometimes it's helpful to have an older woman step in and say, that's not helpful, that's divisive within the church body, and that relationship can be restored quickly. That's the goal.
Yeah.
But if it continues and it becomes, an issue that starts to spread within the church, then yeah, you follow Matthew 18 all the way to the end.
Yeah, sure. So we follow it to the end.
Yep.
Me as the person that is, let's excommunicated, I think is the word we would use there. One, what does that mean for me as far
Yep.
as interaction with the church or people in the church? Should the other members have anything to do with me outside of the church? And what does that say as far as my stance as a believer?
Yeah. Okay. So let me change the terminology
Sure.
because, Eucharist is a perfectly biblical word derived from Greek, but we don't call communion the Eucharist.
Fair
here.
enough.
The reason is because there's so much Catholic overtones that it just compromises it, where now people think they're actually taking of the body and the bread, the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. So we use the Lord's table, we use communion. I don't use the term excommunication because that sounds so Catholic. And even though the word itself,
Right.
Just means to remove from as a communicant, as part of the community. So I use the word disfellowship.
Sure. Okay.
Somebody goes through church discipline, they get disfellowshipped, asked to leave the church until they come to a place of repentance. By the way, again, it's not like, you're forever banned from verse by verse. No, the goal, even in the final step of discipline, is let's gain our brother back after they've, to use Paul's language, been turned over to Satan for a period of testing. So I use the term disfellowship, and the other reason I don't use excommunication as a term is because within the Catholic worldview, they view, the Pope and the Church as having keys to the kingdom. To go back to Jesus's language when he's talking to Peter, and so they actually historically would view that as you have the power to remove somebody's salvation.
Yeah.
I don't have that power, Levi. I don't even have the power to know who's ultimately saved and not saved. That's a need to know basis, and only the Lord knows that. But we do disfellowship in the sense of protecting the purity of the church, actually to help that person deal with that sin until they're able to be restored. And that's the process of Matthew 18 at work within the church body. Typically, I'll just be frank, in the American church world, what happens as you walk down that process with somebody is they just bolt and go to the next church that doesn't ask questions. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of our world.
The blessing and curse of choices, I suppose,
Yep.
in America. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So what is it as another member, another believer in the church in that scenario? What does that mean for interaction between them and said person?
Yeah, there's a lot of emotions
Yeah.
at work. There's the feeling of being, jilted, or there's continuing sin that we do have an expectation in terms of Scripture to distance ourselves from. So in some cases, it's inevitable that you'll still rub shoulders. Sometimes that involves family members. So I wouldn't advise somebody, if your family member gets removed from the church, like, well, I can't go to Thanksgiving dinner now because that person's been disfellowshipped. No, I think you can go with a clear conscience, but the communal aspects of the church involving the taking of communion, the worship together, those things that really constitute the gathering of the church, that's the way that now they've been disassociated. So that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of how it affects everybody within the church body. Some people are going to be disfellowshipped who you work with.
Sure.
And it's not like, well, I can't go to work anymore because that person's there. And no, you can go to work, you can, say hi to them at HEB, and you can interact with them. But whatever that precious state is where you're in lockstep, you're in relational commitment to one another as a church body, as the gathering church. Now that has been broken and compromised, and you're going to feel that if you go to work with that person, or if you see them at HEB, or if that's a family member. There's no way for that not to be the case.
Sure.
And it's probably an opportunity for you to pray, or maybe even communicate. If let's go back to hypothetical Levi. If I saw hypothetical Levi, at Thanksgiving dinner, like, dudes, you need to own this sin and go back to the elders and say, I made a mistake, and be restored, there'll be opportunity for that.
Absolutely. I think it's good to point out here, even in the church community, there tends to be the communication is that there's a disdain for the quote unquote cancel culture and what that can do. But you do see a lot of church people, well, I don't agree with this brand or this company, so I'm just going to separate for that. And I see this as a good point and talking point to remind that this shouldn't get kind of melded into that, well, they've been removed for now, so they're canceled. Let's just not.
Yep.
It's an opportunity for grace, love, and to, like you said, keeping that focus of repentance and bring your brother back.
Thank you, Levi. You just triggered me. So the problem with cancer culture did I say cancer
You
culture?
did. Same thing.
Okay, Freudian slip, but I'm not sorry for it. Cancel culture, which is a kind of cancer. There's no forgiveness in
Yes.
that. There's no restoration. So that's the problem with the world, is that the world, we inevitably as human beings have a desire for law.
Yeah.
It just comes out of us. We need rules, And even the world that has rejected Christianity by and large, and they still want rules.
Right.
So they're creating new rules, and they're weird rules, and they'll cancel. But the problem when you distance yourself from Christianity is that you lose grace.
Yeah.
You lose repentance. You lose restoration. I mean, that's built all the way through the New Testament as part of its ethos. That's built into church discipline as part of actually the goal of what's happening is that you restore and that you offer grace to somebody. Cancel culture doesn't understand that. They don't offer
Yeah.
that. They're about the law without grace, and that's an interesting development in our modern day world as they've gone away from Christianity. They have a new ethic that's been established, but it's without grace, and it's a hard world. So
Yeah,
good luck in that world if you get canceled and you don't have an instinct or a desire to offer grace as Jesus taught us.
It's an opportunity to set ourselves apart, to look different than the world. And we got to keep that as the focus.
Yeah.
So let's look at the kind of the same thing on the other side of the coin, as I see it.
Was that a Freudian slip?
It might have
Probably
been. I don't know. So our elder was talking, Forrest, one of our elders was talking on membership this weekend and gave a personal testimony. He was talking when he left his previous church that he asked for release from that.
Yeah.
Which in me, I had a question about that prior to of what does that look like for us, but I will admit it jabbed a little bit of a sore spot because as I've talked about some of my background before, I went through a Bible school that didn't have a healthy perspective on some of that, on the not touching God's anointing, and you have to be under that authority and listen to what they say, and watched people try to move to another state, and people in authority said, nope, I don't feel like it's your time. You're supposed to stay here, and it became contention.
Okay.
So I believe Forrest's heart was showing the respect and admiration for, and I want to do this in the right way.
Yeah.
But I can see other people's hearing, I ask for a release and thinking, well, is this a contract? What does that mean for me? So what does that process look like? If it's time for me to move on, or if I need to move to a new state, or feel called to go to another ministry or something like that, what does that look like?
Good. These are tough questions, but real.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate what you're presenting here is probably stuff that people have struggled with. So let's look at the extremes and try to find a middle ground. So one extreme would be, I'm an American. I do what I want. I go where I want. I don't answer to anybody. So Teddy Roosevelt, when they were coming up with like the animal that will represent America. I don't know if you've heard this story. They wanted the bald eagle, and somebody else wanted the turkey. I think that was Benjamin Franklin earlier, and Teddy Roosevelt wanted the grizzly bear because he thought that captured the American spirit, like somebody living out in the wilderness all by themselves, don't need anybody, will kill anything and eat anything. that's where we get into a dangerous place because we have no community. We have no spiritual authority over our lives. So that's not good for somebody to just kind of cavalierly within the church come up to the pastor and say, I'm leaving and I don't care what you have to say about it. And okay, so that's one extreme. The other extreme would be kind of a fully submitted, this person has authority over my life to say, who I should marry and when I should get married and, whether or not I should move. I mean, that's an abuse, I think, of the authority within that position. There are limits to spiritual authority. Yeah. And so I think actually the marriage analogy is a good one because, I officiate weddings, so I have a certain amount of power, but I'm not going to tell somebody you need to marry that person or you can't marry that person, but I might say that person's in sin. I don't think you should pursue that route. And that's, I think, a legitimate expression of my spiritual authority. So back to your example. Let's say you get, you live in San Antonio, you get a job offer in Wichita. I don't know who would want to live up there, but anyways. And you come to me and say, I'm moving to Wichita. I think the wise thing would be, to seek counsel for the spiritual authority. I'm leaving this community. I have a job offer. I'm considering it. Use that as an opportunity for dialogue because I might say something like, okay, have you found a good church to plug into there? Have you weighed out the pros and cons of your spiritual gifts? Like everybody knows you here and you're, we're super invested in children's ministry and you lead these things. You're going to be a big loss. Have you thought about how that might be used in your place there? And that I think it will ease also your entree into another place because you plug into a church, let's say in Wichita, then they contact me, your previous pastor, and say, hey, do you know Levi? He's, yes, he served faithfully here at Verse by Verse. So don't rob yourself of that because we have such an American mentality, like nobody's going to tell me what to do. That there's an in between those two extremes that I think can be healthy and can be helpful to you as you are under spiritual authority. And Forrest, what he gave is a good example. Yeah. Because, that was one church in San Antonio. He's coming to another church, and he feels gifted and called even to be a part of a startup church. That's fantastic. Yeah. We need more churches in Central South Texas because, there's people flooding into this area. And so I'll have those conversations with people who say, I need to move from this church to this church because I feel called to this, or I got hired for this, or I want to be a part of this ministry for this reason. And I think elders like myself need to have enough humility to say, okay, I trust you with this, go and keep me updated on how things transpire.
Absolutely.
Does it always happen that way? No.
Yeah.
I've been a pastor long enough where people just leave and I never hear anything from them. Even people who've signed a membership, commitment to the church, and it's like, well, where'd you go? And sometimes they don't even go to another church. They just kind of wander out there in the wilderness. I don't think that honors the Lord.
Sure, absolutely. So let's move on to a question that I personally feel, and I think you do too, that it could have its own theology and an action topic someday, which it may. We live in a unique age, especially after COVID. We had a lot of people connect online because that was the primary form of ministry through that time. I know you've said you had some emails since we acknowledged, hey, we're moving to the membership process from all over the world. Yeah. What do I need to do to be a member? Can you let's just speak to that? I'll leave it there.
Can you be a member of a church in San Antonio if you live in Tucson, Arizona? Yeah. The short answer to that is no.
Sure.
And it would be silly for me here to denounce the internet as some kind of, evil thing that, the Lord used even some of the platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and other things to minister to people through that bizarre COVID era.
Yeah.
And, I've benefited greatly from the sermons of people like John Piper and Tim Keller and others who, have put their messages online. I've been able to listen to them. So I'm not here to to say that that's not a legitimate way in which for people to grow and to mature spiritually.
It's extra resource and study.
Yeah, it can't be your church.
Yeah.
YouTube can't be your church. Facebook can't be your church. You need, the nature of ecclesia, the Greek word for church, is the gathering. There needs to be that, and the physical dimension of that is important. I want to qualify that just a bit because I know we have shut-ins. Shut-ins have always been a thing within the church body, and so we have to, make an effort to help those people who can't physically get to church. And that's where technology has actually been a benefit to the church, where those people can be engaged in ways that they couldn't, even 50 years ago. So I am thankful for that, but for the person in Tucson, Arizona, let's just talk about that person. That person needs to find a church in their local community to plug into. And it might not be their preferred church, but that's where God has them. There's churches there where you can plug in. There might be, like we were talking about earlier, the theological triage. There might be a few things where you have to come to the elders or the leaders of the church and say, I'm not totally on board with this, but can I still be a member here? I won't make it a matter of contentiousness. Okay. I just think that's healthier for the individual. I think that's the healthier for the churches. We talked about in our video previous, I can't shepherd everybody in San Antonio. Right. I'm not the pastor of San Antonio because I take on that title. Similarly, I can't realistically shepherd people in Tucson, Arizona, or wherever. We even have folks that watch our content in other countries, in Singapore and in Europe. I can't shepherd those individuals. It's hard enough to shepherd the people who are actually part of our church. So to add that component just overly complexifies it and I think impedes the spiritual health of those individuals. So with every, Levi, every time there's a technological uptick in society, there's negative things that come with that. So that goes back to, I think I heard a story once that the tools that they use to help kill bugs in crops back in the day, so this is like the early 20th century, that's the same technology, that's the same scientific development that they used with the gas chambers in Europe. When in World War II, they killed millions of people, millions of Jews and others. Every time there's a technological advantage, okay, now we can kill bugs and pesticides can be used to grow more crops and feed more people, there's going to be a negative thing associated with that as well. And that's just part of human society. So we're talking about technology. There's advantages to that. We can listen to more messages. We can be engaged in ways that are really beneficial. Books have exploded. We've got Kindle, we've got Amazon, we've got things, Audible, that you can absorb more content. But with this comes some negative things that we need to address. And I think that's one of them. You need to find a local church plugged in.
It can't take the place of a relationship.
It cannot.
Even being able to have online interaction, there's still too much missing from the relationship.
Yes. Face-to-face communication is so different than, the kind of online world of making comments and interacting with people.
Yeah.
Not that that's not important or not valuable, it's just insufficient.
Yeah, I would say that the shift in someone's thought or perspective would need to be that digesting the content is not being a part of the church. So you can't see watching someone's John MacArthur, per se, stuff on YouTube as I'm part of the church because I'm digesting their content. That doesn't make you a part of that church. That doesn't make you involved or active in that church. You're not volunteering. You're not doing the biblical steps of what being a part of the church is.
You're not bearing one another's burdens. You're not engaged in kind of the relational capital that's built in the local gathering of churches. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
All right. Any closing thoughts or added points you'd like to add before I wrap it up?
Yeah, I've been saying, how long have we been doing Theology in Action? Maybe a year and a half or so.
Year and a half, 2 years, somewhere in there.
So I've been saying, since the beginning, go to church.
Yeah.
So now I'm I'm going to add to that, join a church,
Yeah,
become a member of a local church body, because going to church is great. And, that should be the starting point. Like, you don't join a church and then go to it. You got to go, you got to explore it, you got to read the doctrinal statement, you got to get to know the elders. There needs to be that kind of exploratory process, which should take what, a month, 2 months,
Yeah.
3 months, 6 months as you're going to this church. But, after about 6 months, a year, it's like, you're like a guy dating a girl who's never going to get married, like, join the church,
Yeah.
become a member, pull the trigger. That's probably a bad analogy. Like, move forward and be committed to a local church. Go to church, join the church.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time. And if I can add something at the end of that, I would say, we said at the beginning that we all kind of have that devil's advocate tendency from someone that's setting from the outside perspective in, and I'm probably talking a little more to our members in this moment right now. Keep in mind, like, maybe there needs to be a little bit of a perspective shift in, like, this isn't a bad thing. You can feel the tension and the uncertainty sometimes in that. It's a blessing to be able to so easily be a part of such a healthy community. There's churches across the world that, I feel like dad talking to the kid, if this kid in Africa would love to have the food that you have, but there are churches across the world and people that are having to walk 10, 15 miles without shoes to sit in a house worried about being killed to be a part of a local body.
Yep.
So I think that as much of a devil's advocate as I can play, is I always want to come back to, man, I'm a part of a healthy church, and I'm blessed to get to be here now and be a part of what God's doing in such a great community. So if you are a member of any church, keep that in mind even in the rough times. And if you're looking from the verse-by-verse fellowship side, keep that in mind as well. That's all we've got for today. If you are interested in any of our content to help add to what you're doing with your local church, you can check us out on Wednesdays and Sundays. We live stream. We do also put our content here. We have plenty of other videos for Theology in Action, other playlists as well. Until next time.